Welcome to Marple Whispers, where every story is more than a tale, it's a trap. I'm Sean, and as you listen, remember, Miss Marple taught us one thing. Nothing is ever quite what it seems. In the quaint shadows of an English seaside town, a chilling whisper of murder echoes through Laurel Cottage. A woman lies dead, poisoned by arsenic in her wine. Her cousin Clara accused, fingerprints on the bottle, a bitter quarrel the night before. But when desperate husband Reginald turns to the unassuming Miss Jane Marple, the elderly sleuth with eyes sharper than a detective's blade, secrets unravel like a tangled skein of yarn. Was it envy-fueled revenge, a doctor's hidden guilt, or a victim's own deadly plot to frame the innocent from beyond the grave? Dive into this tale of malice, manipulation, and masterful deduction, where human nature's darkest twists lead to a shocking truth that will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Visitor. The late summer air hung heavy over St. Mary Mead, the kind of stillness that seemed to hush even the birds into silence. In her modest cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her nimble fingers guiding a pair of knitting needles through the delicate loops of a pale pink shawl. The sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, dappling the polished oak floor with intricate patterns that danced like secrets. Her sitting room was a haven of order. China teacups neatly stacked, a vase of freshly cut roses on the mantel, and a small stack of books on village life that she consulted more for amusement than necessity. To an outsider, it was a scene of serene domesticity, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes missed nothing, and her mind was ever alert to the undercurrents that rippled beneath the surface of even the quietest day. A sharp rap at the door broke the tranquility, its urgency softened by a hesitancy that suggested the caller was not entirely certain of their purpose. Miss Marple paused, her needle stilled, and tilted her head slightly, as if she could discern the visitor's character from the knock alone. "Dolly," she called softly, "do see who's there." Dolly Bantry, her loyal maid and occasional confidant, bustled from the kitchen, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Moments later she returned, her round face creased with curiosity. "A Mr. Reginald Harper, ma'am," she announced. "Says it's urgent. Looks like he's seen a ghost, if you ask me." "Show him in, please," Miss Marple said, setting her knitting aside with care. She smoothed her lavender skirt and adjusted the spectacles that perched on her nose, her expression one of gentle expectancy. Though her mind was already turning, sifting through possibilities like a gardener turning soil, the man who entered was not the sort one would notice in a crowd, yet his distress made him impossible to ignore. Reginald Harper was in his early 40s, his brown hair flecked with premature grey, his suit creased and travel-worn, as though he'd come straight from a long journey without pausing to change. His eyes, dark and hollow, flickered with a mixture of desperation and hope as they settled on Miss Marple. His hands clasped tightly before him betrayed a slight tremble, and his shoulders hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. "Miss Marple," he began, his voice hoarse, "I'm sorry to intrude like this. I've heard of you, your reputation, I mean. They say you see things others miss. I need your help. It's my wife, Clara. She's been accused of something terrible, murder." The word hung in the air, sharp and discordant in the cosy room. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, but her face remained composed, her blue eyes bright with interest. "Murder," she murmured, as if tasting the word. "Do sit down, Mr. Harper. You look quite unwell. Dolly, Would you fetch some tea? The Darjeeling, I think. No tea, thank you, Harper said quickly, though he sank into the offered armchair, his frame seeming to collapse into it. I haven't time. Clara's in custody in Danemouth. They think she poisoned her cousin, Evelyn Ward. It's absurd, Miss Marple. She wouldn't harm anyone. But the police, they're convinced. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady and reassuring. Tell me everything, Mr. Harper, from the very beginning. Leave nothing out, however trivial it seems. The smallest detail can be the key to the truth. Harper drew a shaky breath, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. It happened 2 days ago at our home, Laurel Cottage in Danemouth. Evelyn was staying with us. She's Clara's cousin, though they weren't close. She was found dead in the drawing room late at night. The doctor said it was arsenic poisoning. The police found a bottle of arsenic in our garden shed, and they say Clara's fingerprints are on it. They think she put it in Evelyn's wine at dinner. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. And was there any reason for the police to suspect your wife, beyond this bottle? Harper's face flushed, and he looked away, his fingers twisting together. There was a quarrel, he admitted. The night before Evelyn died, she and Clara argued. It was loud enough that the neighbours might have heard. Evelyn could be difficult. She had a sharp tongue, always picking at Clara, criticising her clothes, her cooking, even our marriage. That night, it was about a brooch, Clara's mother's, a family heirloom. Evelyn borrowed it without asking and broke it. Clara was furious, said things she didn't mean, but that's not murder, Miss Marple. It's not, of course not, Miss Marple said soothingly, though her mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of Harper's story. And who else was present at this dinner? Just us, Clara, Evelyn, myself, and our maid Jenny. Oh, and Dr. Grayson, Evelyn's physician. He's an old friend of hers, been treating her for years. He joined us for dinner, left before midnight. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers itching to pick up her knitting, though she resisted for now. And the wine, how was it served? From a decanter, Harper said. We brought up a bottle of claret from the cellar. Clara decanted it, but we all handled it at some point, me, Clara, Jenny. Even Dr. Grayson poured his own glass. I think, how very interesting, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but laced with a curiosity that belied her placid demeanour. And Evelyn herself, what was she like? You said she was difficult, but in what way? Harper hesitated, choosing his words with care. Evelyn was beautiful, charming when she wanted to be. People liked her at first, men especially. But she had a cruel streak. She'd find your weak spot and prod it, like a child poking a bruise. With Clara, it was worse. They were close as children, but Evelyn changed. She'd mock Clara's shyness, her simple tastes. It was as if she envied Clara's happiness and wanted to spoil it. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Envy, she thought, was a motive as old as time, and one she'd seen unravel many a tangled skein. And this Dr. Grayson, she said, what sort of man is he? Respectable, Harper said, a bit reserved, but kind. He's known Evelyn since she was young. I think he felt sorry for her. She could be lonely, despite her charm. Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind conjuring an image of Laurel Cottage, a house filled with tension, secrets simmering beneath polite smiles. I shall come to Danemouth tomorrow, Mr. Harper, she said decisively. There is much to consider, and I should like to see the place for myself. In the meantime, Go home and try to rest. Worry will not help your wife, but clarity might." Harper stood, his expression a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I don't know what I'd do without your help." As Dolly showed him out, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, the needles clicking rhythmically, a counterpoint to the whirl of her thoughts. A poisoned cousin, a framed wife, a doctor with a long history, and a maid who saw more than she said. It was a puzzle, and Miss Marple loved puzzles. She thought of her old friend Mrs. Eldridge, whose envy of her sister's marriage had led to such petty cruelties in St. Mary Mead years ago. Human nature, she mused, never changed. And it was in that constancy that she would find the truth. The roses on the mantel seemed to nod in agreement as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room. Tomorrow, Miss Marple thought, she would begin to unravel the threads of Laurel Cottage. For now, she knitted on, each stitch a step closer to the solution. Chapter 2. Laurel Cottage. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels on the tracks provided a soothing counterpoint to the whirlwind of thoughts swirling in Miss Jane Marple's mind as she journeyed toward Danemouth. Seated by the window in a second-class carriage, she gazed out at the rolling countryside, where fields of golden wheat swayed gently under a sky of unblemished blue. Patches of woodland dotted the landscape, their leaves just beginning to hint at the autumnal hues to come, and here and there a farmhouse stood sentinel, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. It was a scene of pastoral tranquillity, yet Miss Marple's keen eyes saw beyond the surface beauty, much as she saw beyond the facades people so carefully constructed. She had packed with her customary efficiency a small leather suitcase containing a change of clothes, her favourite knitting needles and yarn, a notebook bound in faded blue leather for recording her observations, and a well-thumbed copy of the Bible. Though she seldom needed to consult it these days, its passages were etched in her memory, like familiar paths in St. Mary Mead. Her thoughts drifted back to Reginald Harper's visit the previous day, his desperate plea echoing in her ears. Murder, that most heinous of crimes, had intruded upon the quiet life of Laurel Cottage, and Miss Marple knew from long experience that such acts were rarely born of sudden impulse, but rather festered in the hidden corners of the human heart. Danemouth, she recalled from her infrequent travels, was a seaside town that had grown from a humble fishing village into a modest resort, attracting visitors with its pebbled beaches and bracing sea air. It was larger than her own village, with a bustling high street lined with shops selling everything from fresh seafood to postcards of the lighthouse that stood guard over the harbour. Yet, like St. Mary Mead, it was a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. Gossip, Miss Marple mused, was the lifeblood of such communities, a double-edged sword that could both obscure and reveal the truth. As the train pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and a final jolt, Miss Marple gathered her belongings and stepped onto the platform. The air was tangy with salt, carried on a breeze that ruffled her neat white hair beneath her sensible hat. She spotted Reginald Harper almost immediately. He stood apart from the crowd of arriving holiday-makers, his face etched with lines of worry that seemed deeper in the daylight. He hurried forward, tipping his hat with a politeness that spoke of breeding, though his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. "Miss Marple, how good of you to come so promptly," he said, taking her suitcase with a grateful nod. The cab is waiting. I can't tell you what this means to us, to Clara and me." "Nonsense, Mr. Harper," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm and reassuring, like a gentle stream smoothing over rocks. "It's the least I can do. Now tell me, has there been any news from the police?" Harper shook his head as he led her to the waiting hansom cab, its horse stamping impatiently. "Nothing new. Clara's still being held for questioning at the station. Inspector Crane is a thorough man, but he's convinced she's guilty. I fear he'll charge her soon if we don't find something to prove otherwise." The cab rattled along the cobbled streets of Danemouth, passing colourful fishing boats bobbing in the harbour, and shops with windows displaying nets of oranges and jars of seaside rock. Miss Marple absorbed it all, her mind noting the cheerful normalcy that contrasted sharply with the darkness at Laurel Cottage. "And what of this Inspector Crane?" she inquired. "Is he the sort who jumps to conclusions, or does he weigh the evidence carefully?" "He's fair, I suppose," Harper conceded, staring out at the passing scenery. "But the facts look damning. The arsenic, the fingerprints, the quarrel. It's all stacked against Clara." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tapping lightly on the handle of her umbrella, which she carried despite the fine weather, a habit from her village days, where rain could come unannounced. "Facts, Mr. Harper, are like puzzle pieces. They must be fitted together properly, or the picture is distorted. Tell me more about your household. Who else lives at Laurel Cottage besides you and your wife?" "Just Jenny, our maid," Harper replied. "She's been with us for 3 years, reliable, hard-working, and Evelyn, of course, during her stay. She arrived about a month ago, unannounced, saying she needed a change of air. Clara was pleased at first, but it soured quickly." The cab turned onto a quieter lane, lined with hedgerows bursting with blackberries, and soon Laurel Cottage came into view. It was a picturesque dwelling, 2 stories of weathered stone draped in ivy that climbed toward the chimney like ambitious fingers. The garden was a riot of colour. Late-blooming roses in shades of crimson and pink clambered over trellises, while dahlias nodded their heavy heads in the borders. A gravel path led to the front door, flanked by lavender bushes that released their soothing scent as the cab pulled up. Yet, for all its charm, there was an air of melancholy about the place, as if the house itself mourned the tragedy within its walls. Harper paid the driver and escorted Miss Marple inside, where the hallway was cool and dim, panelled in dark wood that absorbed the light. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner, its pendulum swinging like a metronome, measuring out the hours of uncertainty. He led her into the drawing room, a comfortable space with chintz-covered armchairs arranged around a fireplace, now cold and empty. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on history and gardening, and a vase of wilting lilies stood on a side table, their petals drooping as if in sympathy. Clara Harper was not there to greet them. Harper explained she was still at the police station, but expected back soon, under bail conditions. Instead, Jenny the maid appeared, a sturdy young woman in her mid-20s with rosy cheeks and a cap perched on her auburn hair. She curtsied awkwardly, her hands twisting in her apron. "Ma'am, sir," she said, her voice carrying a faint Cornish accent. "I've prepared the guest room, as you asked. Shall I bring tea?" "Yes, thank you, Jenny," Harper said, and as she bustled away, he turned to Miss Marple. "Please, make yourself comfortable." I know this isn't the welcome we'd hoped for." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her eyes roaming the room with apparent casualness, though nothing escaped her notice. The faint dust on the mantel, suggesting recent neglect. A framed photograph of Clara and Reginald on their wedding day, their smiles radiant, and a small writing desk in the corner, its surface scattered with letters and a half-finished embroidery. "A lovely room," she commented, "so homey." And yet one senses a shadow. Harper sighed, sinking into the opposite chair. It's been unbearable. Evelyn's body was found right here, slumped in that very chair you're sitting in. No, forgive me, the one by the window. She collapsed after dinner, complaining of stomach pains. We thought it was indigestion at first, but she worsened quickly. By morning, she was gone. Miss Marple's expression softened with sympathy, but her mind sharpened. "Describe the evening, if you will." Every detail might matter. Harper leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. It was a Thursday, ordinary enough. Evelyn had been with us for weeks, and tensions were high. That afternoon, she and Clara quarrelled over the brooch, Clara's mother's pearl one. Evelyn had taken it without asking, and when Clara confronted her, Evelyn laughed it off, saying it was old-fashioned anyway. But then she admitted she'd dropped it, breaking the clasp. Clara was devastated. It was one of the few mementos she had left. Words were exchanged, harsh ones. Clara said she wished Evelyn had never come, that she was ruining our lives. And Evelyn's response, Miss Marple prompted gently. She smirked, said Clara was too sensitive, that life wasn't a fairy tale. Then she went upstairs to rest before dinner. Dr. Grayson arrived around 7. He often dined with us when Evelyn was here, as her physician and friend. He's a widower, lives alone in town. Dinner was in the dining room. Roast chicken, vegetables, and the claret from the cellar. Miss Marple's interest piqued. The cellar? Might I see it later? And who selected the wine? I did, Harper said. It's my habit. I brought up the bottle, and Clara decanted it in the kitchen. Jenny served, but we all helped ourselves to seconds. Evelyn drank more than usual, I think. 2 glasses, perhaps 3. Conversation was strained after the quarrel. But Doctor... Grayson tried to lighten the mood, talking about his latest patients and the town's gossip. Jenny returned then with a tray of tea, setting it down with a clatter that betrayed her nerves. "Milk and sugar, ma'am?" she asked Miss Marple. "Just milk, thank you, dear," Miss Marple replied, observing the girl's steady hands despite the tremor in her voice. As Jenny poured, Miss Marple said casually, "You must have been shocked by what happened, Jenny. Such a dreadful thing in a quiet house like this." Jenny's eyes widened, and she glanced at Harper before answering. "Oh, yes, ma'am." Miss Ward was lively, always chatting. But that night, after dinner, she turned pale, said her tummy hurt. Mr. Harper suggested calling the doctor back, but she waved it off, said it was nothing. I helped her to bed, but by midnight she was moaning something awful. We sent for Dr. Grayson then, but it was too late. "Too late," Miss Marple echoed softly. "And did she say anything else? Any last words?" Jenny hesitated, her cheeks flushing. She muttered about the wine tasting bitter, but I thought it was the pain talking. Then she whispered something about paying for it. I couldn't make it out clear. Harper frowned. "You never mentioned that before, Jenny." "I didn't think it mattered, sir," Jenny said quickly. "It was garbled like." Miss Marple smiled encouragingly. "Everything matters, my dear. You've been most helpful." Now perhaps you could show me the dining room." The dining room adjoined the drawing room, separated by folding doors that stood open, revealing a mahogany table set for four, as if frozen in time. Sunlight filtered through net curtains, casting a soft glow on the polished silver and crystal glasses. Miss Marple stepped inside, her footsteps muffled on the Persian rug, and surveyed the space with the eye of a connoisseur of human drama. "The decanter was here on the sideboard," Harper explained, pointing to an ornate cabinet against the wall. "We left it out after dinner as usual." Miss Marple approached the sideboard, her fingers lightly tracing the wood, noting the faint ring where a glass might have rested. "And who cleared the table?" "Jenny did mostly," Harper said, but Evelyn lingered, sipping her wine by the window. A door at the far end led to the kitchen, and beyond that, stairs descended to the cellar. Miss Marple requested a tour, and Harper obliged, lighting a lantern to illuminate the stone steps. The cellar was cool and damp, shelves lined with bottles gathering dust, crates of vegetables stacked in corners. "We keep the better wines here," Harper said. "The claret was from this rack. Vintage 1918, a gift from my uncle." Miss Marple peered at the empty space where the bottle had been. "No lock on the door." "No," Harper admitted. "It's inside the house, so we never bothered." "Convenient," Miss Marple murmured, her mind noting how easily anyone could have tampered with the bottle before it was brought up. Ascending the stairs, she felt a chill that had little to do with the temperature. Back in the sunlight, they proceeded to the garden. The path wound through flower beds alive with bees, their hum a cheerful backdrop to the sombre conversation. At the rear stood the shed, a modest wooden structure with a padlock that hung open, its key still in the lock. Inside, tools hung on pegs, spades, rakes, shears, and sacks of fertilizer slumped against the walls. Shelves held jars of seeds, bottles of linseed oil, and other gardening sundries. Inspector Crane arrived then, summoned by Harper's earlier telegram. He was a tall, angular man in his 50s, with a clipped moustache and eyes like polished steel, sharp and unyielding. His uniform was impeccable, and he carried himself with the authority of one accustomed to command. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone polite but laced with skepticism, "I've heard of your amateur investigations. Mr. Harper insists on your involvement, but I must warn you, this is police business." "Of course, Inspector," Miss Marple replied demurely, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "I wouldn't dream of interfering. Merely observing, if I may." Crane grunted, leading them to a shelf where a space gaped empty. "The arsenic bottle was here, labelled plain as day. Used for killing weeds, or so Mrs. Harper claims. Her fingerprints were all over it, no one else's." Miss Marple leaned in, noting the layer of dust on the shelf, disturbed in a neat circle around the missing bottle's spot. Nearby jars were pristine, untouched. "How very odd," she said. "One would expect more disturbance if it were handled frequently. And the shed, is it often used?" "Daily, for gardening," Harper said. "Clara tends the roses herself." Crane crossed his arms. "The evidence is clear. Motive, means, opportunity, all point to Mrs. Harper. The quarrel was witnessed by neighbours through the open window. Voices raised, threats made." "Threats?" Miss Marple echoed, her voice mild. "I could kill you for this," Crane quoted. Mrs. Harper's words, according to a passer-by. Harper protested. "It was heat of the moment." Clara didn't mean it literally. Miss Marple's mind whirred, recalling similar outbursts in St. Mary Mead, words flung in anger, later regretted. But here they had deadly consequences. "And the post-mortem, Inspector?" confirmed Arsenic. "Undoubtedly," Crane said. "Administered in the wine, likely." Residue in her glass matched. As they exited the shed, Miss Marple paused by a rose bush, plucking a wilted bloom. "Beautiful garden," she said, "but even beauty can hide thorns. Tell me, Inspector, has anyone checked for other sources of arsenic? Rat poison in the town, perhaps?" Crane's eyes narrowed. "We're thorough, Miss Marple." "But if you have suggestions," she smiled innocently. "Oh, none yet. Just wondering." The afternoon wore on, and Clara Harper returned, escorted by a constable. She was a slender woman of 35, with delicate features and blue eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly, but strands escaped, framing a face pale as porcelain. She embraced her husband, then turned to Miss Marple, with trembling hands. "You're here to help," Reginald told me. "I didn't do it. I couldn't." Miss Marple patted her arm. "Sit, my dear. Tell me your story in your own words." Over fresh tea, Clara recounted the events, her voice breaking at times. The quarrel, the dinner, Evelyn's collapse, all matched Harper's account, but with personal touches. Evelyn's mocking laugh, the sting of betrayal over the brooch. "She was my cousin, but she changed after her inheritance ran dry. Always hinting for money, criticizing everything. That night, I lost my temper, but poison, never." Miss Marple listened attentively, her knitting now in her lap, needles clicking softly like a second heartbeat. "And Dr. Grayson, did he notice anything amiss?" "He was kind as always," Clara said. "Poured his own wine, I recall, saying he preferred it aerated longer. He left early, before Evelyn fell ill." A mental note. Grayson's caution with the wine. Coincidence? Miss Marple probed further, drawing out details of Evelyn's habits, her letters, her visitors. Evelyn had received mail from London, cryptic notes she burned after reading. And once, a shadowy figure at the gate late at night, perhaps a suitor. As dusk fell, casting long shadows through the windows, Miss Marple retired to her room. A cosy chamber overlooking the garden. Lying in bed, she reviewed the day's revelations, the unlocked cellar, the disturbed dust, Jenny's overheard mutterings, Clara's anguish. Pieces of a puzzle indeed, but the picture was emerging, a frame perhaps, around an innocent woman, crafted by a hand more cunning than apparent. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the distant crash of waves on Danemouth shore, a reminder that truths, like tides, eventually revealed what lay beneath. Tomorrow she would visit Dr. Grayson, peel back another layer. For now, the night held its secrets, but Miss Marple was patient. The truth, she knew, always surfaced in time. Chapter 3. The Doctor's Testimony. The morning sun rose over Danemouth with a clarity that seemed to mock the murky shadows cast by the tragedy at Laurel Cottage. Miss Jane Marple, ever an early riser, had already breakfasted on tea and toast in the quiet dining room, her eyes lingering on the sideboard where the fatal decanter had stood. The house was hushed, save for the faint clatter of Jenny in the kitchen, and the occasional creak of floorboards, as Reginald Harper paced upstairs, his anxiety palpable even through the walls. Clara, released on bail but confined to the house, had yet to emerge from her room, her spirit bruised by suspicion and grief. Miss Marple, dressed in a sensible tweed skirt and a lavender blouse, adjusted her hat, a modest affair adorned with a single silk rose, and gathered her knitting bag. She had decided to call on Dr. Arthur Grayson, whose role as Evelyn Ward's physician and dinner guest intrigued her. The doctor, she suspected, held pieces of the puzzle that might illuminate the darker corners of this affair. With a word to Jenny to expect her return by luncheon, she stepped out into the crisp sea air, her umbrella tucked under her arm, as both a precaution and a prop, its familiarity grounding her in the face of uncertainty. Danemouth's streets were alive with the bustle of morning. Fishermen hauled nets by the harbour, their voices carrying salty oaths. Shopkeepers swept their doorsteps exchanging gossip about the weather and, inevitably, the scandal at Laurel Cottage. Miss Marple navigated the cobbled lanes with a purposeful stride, her slight figure drawing curious glances from passers-by who mistook her for a harmless spinster on an errand. She smiled inwardly at their misjudgment, for she knew that observation, not action, was her greatest weapon. Dr. Grayson's practice was housed in a Georgian building on the High Street, its brass plaque gleaming beside a door painted a sober green. The waiting room was sparsely furnished, with wooden chairs and a table strewn with outdated magazines, their pages curled from the damp sea air. A nurse, brisk and efficient, ushered Miss Marple into the consulting room where Dr. Grayson rose from behind a cluttered desk to greet her. He was a tall man, nearing 60, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead, and eyes that held a guarded intelligence. His suit was immaculate, though a faint stain of ink on his cuff suggested a man preoccupied with more than appearances. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of reserve. "I confess I was surprised to hear of your visit. This business with Evelyn Ward is a tragedy, and I'm not sure what light I can shed." Miss Marple settled into the chair he offered, her knitting bag at her feet, and fixed him with a gaze that was both gentle and penetrating. "You were her physician, Doctor Grayson, and a guest at Laurel Cottage the night she died. I'm merely seeking to understand the circumstances. A woman's life hangs in the balance, after all." He nodded, his expression softening slightly, though his hands clasped on the desk betrayed a faint tension. "Of course, poor Evelyn, a dreadful loss. How may I assist you?" Miss Marple opened her notebook, not to write, but to give her hands something to do, a habit that put others at ease while her mind worked. "Let us begin with Evelyn herself. You knew her for many years, I understand. What was her state of health?" Grayson leaned back, his chair creaking softly. "Physically, Evelyn was robust, strong constitution, no chronic ailments, but her mind, she suffered from periods of melancholy, what we might call nervous exhaustion. She was prone to dark moods, though she concealed them with charm and wit. I prescribed tonics, iron, mostly, and a mild sedative for sleeplessness, but she was inconsistent about taking them. Evelyn was not one to admit weakness." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to her old friend Miss Hartnell, whose outward cheerfulness had masked a similar fragility until a village scandal brought it to light. "And these moods, did they worsen recently? Perhaps during her stay at Laurel Cottage?" Grayson hesitated, his fingers tapping lightly on a medical journal. "I noticed a change, yes. She seemed more restless, more secretive. She'd speak of leaving Danemouth, starting anew somewhere grand, London perhaps, or even abroad. But she never elaborated, and I didn't press. As her doctor, my role was to advise, not to pry. Yet you were also her friend," Miss Marple observed, her tone conversational but pointed. "You dined with the Harpers often during her visit. Did you observe any tension between Evelyn and Clara?" Grayson's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. There was friction, certainly. Evelyn had a sharp tongue, and Clara is sensitive. They clashed over small things. Evelyn borrowing Clara's belongings, making cutting remarks about her housekeeping. The night of the dinner they'd argued earlier, over a broken brooch, I believe. But it seemed a petty squabble, not the prelude to what happened. Miss Marple's needles emerged from her bag, clicking softly as she began a new row, the rhythm steadying her thoughts. And at dinner, how did Evelyn seem? Her usual self, Grayson replied, his voice regaining its professional calm. Charming, a touch provocative. She teased Reginald about his wine collection, complimented Jenny's cooking, and asked me about a patient of mine, a mutual acquaintance. Nothing out of the ordinary. Miss Marple's eyes flicked up, catching a fleeting shadow in his expression. And the wine itself? You drank from the same decanter, I presume? Yes, he said quickly. I poured my own glass, as I recall. I prefer to let claret breathe a bit longer, so I took it directly from the decanter. It tasted perfectly fine. No bitterness, no odd aftertaste. How precise, Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing. Most people don't notice such details unless they're looking for them. You left early, I understand. Grayson nodded. Around 9. I had a patient to see, a minor emergency. Evelyn was still at the table, sipping her wine. She seemed fine then, if a little quiet. Miss Marple made a mental note of his swift departure, her mind conjuring an image of the dining room. The decanter gleaming on the sideboard, Evelyn lingering with her glass, the others distracted by conversation or duties. And did you notice anyone near the decanter before dinner? Or perhaps Evelyn herself? Grayson frowned, as if sifting through memories. Not that I recall. Clara brought the decanter in from the kitchen, and it sat on the sideboard. We all helped ourselves. Jenny was in and out, serving. I suppose anyone could have, but no, I saw nothing suspicious. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. Of course. You've been most helpful, Doctor. One last question. Did Evelyn ever speak of enemies or fears for her safety? He shook his head, though his eyes flickered with something uncertainty, perhaps. No, nothing like that. Evelyn was confident, almost reckless. If she had enemies, she'd have laughed them off. As Miss Marple rose to leave, she glanced at the desk, noting a letter half hidden beneath a stack of papers, its envelope bearing a London postmark. Her eyes lingered a moment before she thanked Grayson and stepped back into the waiting room, where the nurse was tidying magazines with unnecessary vigour. The walk back to Laurel Cottage allowed Miss Marple to reflect. Grayson's account was polished, almost too smooth, like a well-rehearsed script. His insistence on pouring his own wine intrigued her. Caution or mere habit? And that hesitation when she'd asked about Evelyn's enemies, had it been surprise or something more guarded? She thought of Mr. Thompson, a St. Mary Mead grocer who'd once concealed a gambling debt behind a facade of respectability, his lies unravelling under gentle questioning. People, she knew, revealed more in what they omitted than in what they said. Back at the cottage, she found Clara in the drawing-room, her delicate hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. Reginald hovered nearby, offering a cup of tea that Clara waved away. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice fragile but steady, "have you learned anything?" "I feel so helpless, trapped here while everyone whispers." Miss Marple settled beside her, her presence as comforting as a warm hearth. Patience, my dear, we're only beginning to untangle this knot. Tell me, what did you know of Evelyn's life before she came to stay? Clara's brow furrowed. Not much, I'm afraid. We were close as girls. Evelyn was the bold one, always dreaming of adventure. But after her parents died, she inherited a small fortune and moved to London. She'd write occasionally, boasting of parties and suitors, but the letters grew infrequent. When she arrived here, she said she needed rest, but she seemed restless, secretive. She'd lock her door at night, and once I saw her burn a letter in the garden. Miss Marple's interest quickened. Burn a letter? Did you see who it was from? No, Clara admitted, but it was thick, official-looking. She laughed when I asked about it, said it was old business. Before Miss Marple could probe further, Jenny appeared, announcing lunch. The meal was simple, cold ham, salad and fresh bread, but the atmosphere was heavy, the clink of cutlery loud in the silence. Miss Marple observed Jenny closely, noting the girl's quick glances at Clara as if gauging her mistress's mood. After lunch, she requested a tour of Evelyn's room, hoping to uncover traces of the woman's secrets. Evelyn's bedroom was on the second floor, its windows overlooking the garden's roses. The room was tidy, almost austere, with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a dressing table, holding a silver-backed brush and a bottle of lavender water. Miss Marple opened the wardrobe, revealing dresses in vibrant silks, expensive but slightly out of fashion, as if Evelyn had clung to past glories. A locked jewellery box caught her eye, but without a key, it remained a mystery for now. Under the bed she found a small tin, its lid rusted but intact. Inside were charred fragments of paper, the remnants of burned letters. Miss Marple sifted through them carefully, her gloved fingers avoiding the ash. Most were illegible, but one scrap bore a partial address in London, Kensington, and the word debt. She tucked the tin into her bag, intending to examine it later with a magnifying glass. Descending to the drawing room, she found Inspector Crane waiting, his expression a mix of impatience and curiosity. "Miss Marple," he said, "Mr. Harper tells me you've been asking questions. Found anything to contradict the evidence?" "Not contradict, Inspector," she replied, her tone mild. "Merely clarify." "For instance, have you considered Evelyn's own access to arsenic? She was in the shed often, was she not, helping with the roses?" Crane's eyes narrowed. She was, but the bottle had only Mrs. Harper's prints. And the motive, Mrs. Harper's anger over the brooch, the threats are often words flung in haste, Miss Marple interjected gently, but let us consider the wine. If Evelyn drank more than usual, as Mr. Harper suggested, might she not have noticed a bitter taste? Or perhaps someone ensured she wouldn't? Crane frowned. "You're suggesting she poisoned herself?" "That's far-fetched. Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "But human nature is far-fetched, Inspector. People do the most extraordinary things for the most ordinary reasons." As Crane departed, promising to review the post-mortem notes, Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her mind weaving patterns as intricate as her stitches. Evelyn's melancholy, her burned letters, Grayson's careful answers, all pointed to a woman whose charm masked a deeper turmoil. Had she orchestrated her own death to ruin Clara, as Miss Marple suspected? Or was there another hand at work, one clever enough to use Evelyn's own flaws against her? The afternoon waned, and Miss Marple decided to walk to the harbour, hoping the sea air might clear her thoughts. The promenade was lively with strollers, children chasing gulls, and vendors hawking ice creams. She paused by a bench, her eyes scanning the crowd, and noticed a man watching her. A stranger in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a hat. When she met his gaze, he turned abruptly and vanished into the throng. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not with fear but with curiosity. Was he connected to Evelyn's mysterious letters, her London past? She thought of young Tommy Pierce in St. Mary Mead, whose petty thefts had unravelled a larger scheme when she'd noticed his furtive glances. This man, too, might be a thread to pull. Returning to Laurel Cottage, she found Clara in the garden, pruning roses with a distracted air. "Miss Marple," Clara said, her voice trembling, "I remembered something." The day before she died, Evelyn received a telegram. She read it and laughed, such a cold laugh. Then she tore it up and threw it in the fire. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "A telegram, you say? Did you see where it was from?" "London, I think," Clara said. "The envelope was on the hall table." As dusk settled over Danemouth, casting the cottage in a soft purple glow, Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting idle in her lap. The pieces were falling into place. Evelyn's secretive nature, the burned letters, the telegram, Grayson's guarded demeanour. And now a stranger in the crowd. She recalled a village scandal years ago, where a woman's envy had led to a staged theft to discredit a rival. Could Evelyn have planned something similar? A final act of malice? Or was someone else pulling the strings, using her death to settle a score? The sea whispered in the distance, its rhythm echoing the questions in her mind. Tomorrow, she would seek out the telegraph office and speak to Jenny again. For now, she closed her eyes, letting the puzzle simmer, confident that the truth, like the tide, would eventually reveal itself. Chapter 4. The Maid's Tale. The morning light crept into Laurel Cottage with a tentative softness, as if wary of disturbing the lingering shadows of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, having risen with the dawn as was her habit, sat at the small writing desk in her guest room, her blue leather notebook open before her. She jotted a few observations from the previous day. Doctor. Grayson's guarded precision, the charred letter fragments, the stranger on the promenade, each note a thread in the intricate tapestry she was weaving. Her knitting lay folded in its bag, a silent companion to her thoughts, which moved with the same deliberate rhythm as her stitches. The house was quiet, save for the distant clink of china from the kitchen, where Jenny was preparing breakfast. Clara and Reginald Harper, Miss Marple knew, were likely still abed, worn down by the strain of uncertainty. Danemouth was stirring beyond the cottage windows, the cries of gulls mingling with the rumble of delivery carts on the cobbled lane. Miss Marple closed her notebook and adjusted her spectacles, her mind already plotting the day's course. Dr. Grayson's testimony had left her with more questions than answers, and Clara's mention of a telegram piqued her curiosity further. But today, she resolved to focus on the household's quieter voice. Jenny, the maid, whose nervous glances and hesitant words suggested she saw more than she admitted. Servants, Miss Marple had learned in Sion. Mary, Mead were often the unnoticed eyes and ears of a home, their observations as revealing as any formal statement. Descending to the kitchen, she found Jenny scrubbing a copper pot with a vigour that bordered on ferocity, her auburn hair escaping its cap in wisps that caught the morning light. The kitchen was warm, fragrant with the scent of baking bread and brewing tea, a stark contrast to the chill of suspicion that pervaded the rest of the house. Jenny started at Miss Marple's entrance, her hands pausing mid-scrub. "Oh, ma'am, I didn't hear you," she said, her Cornish accent softening the words. "Breakfast'll be ready soon. Porridge and kippers, if that suits." "It sounds delightful, Jenny," Miss Marple replied, settling at the scrubbed pine table with a smile that invited confidence. "But I'd rather have a chat first, if you don't mind. You've been in this house through all its recent troubles, and I suspect you notice more than most." Jenny's cheeks flushed, and she resumed scrubbing, though her movements slowed. "I don't know much, ma'am." "Just a maid, doing my work. Nonsense," Miss Marple said gently, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. "You're the heart of this house, Jenny. You see who comes and goes, who laughs or cries. Tell me about Miss Ward, Evelyn. What would she like to work for?" Jenny hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting interruption. "She was particular," she said at last, "always wanting things just so. Her tea scalding hot, her dresses pressed perfect. But she'd smile and thank me. Give me a shilling now and then. Not like some guests who treat you like furniture." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tracing the grain of the table, recalling her own maid, Florence, whose quiet loyalty had once uncovered a neighbour's pilfering in St. Mary Mead. "And did she ever confide in you?" "Perhaps about her plans, her worries." Jenny's hands stilled, and she bit her lip. "Not confide, exactly. But she'd talk sometimes when I was tidying her room. Said she was tired of Danemouth, wanted to go somewhere exciting, Paris maybe. She'd laugh, but it wasn't a happy laugh, more like she was angry at something." "Angry?" Miss Marple echoed, her interest sharpening. "At whom, do you think?" Jenny shrugged, but her eyes flickered with unease. Mrs. Harper, mostly. They'd bicker over little things like Miss Ward using Mrs. Harper's perfume or leaving her shoes in the hall. But the night she died, it was worse. That brooch business. Mrs. Harper was near tears, shouting she'd never forgive her. Miss Ward just smirked, like she enjoyed it. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. "And that night, Jenny, you served dinner. You were in and out of the dining room. Did you see anything unusual? Anyone near the decanter, perhaps?" Jenny's flush deepened, and she set the pot aside, wiping her hands on her apron. I did notice something, ma'am, but I didn't think it mattered till now. Before dinner, when I was setting the table, I saw Miss Ward in the dining room, alone. She was by the sideboard where the decanter was. Her back was to me, but she was holding a glass, turning it in her hand like she was studying it. I thought she was just admiring the crystal. It's Mrs. Harper's best set, but she looked sly, like a cat that's caught a mouse. "Sly?" Miss Marple repeated, her mind conjuring an image of Evelyn Ward, her beautiful face masking a calculating intent. "How very interesting." "And did she say anything?" "No, ma'am." "She saw me and put the glass down quick, laughed it off, said she was checking for smudges. I didn't think nothing of it then." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "You've a good memory, Jenny. And after dinner, when Miss Ward fell ill, did you see anyone else near the decanter?" Jenny shook her head, but her hesitation spoke volumes. "Not exactly." But Dr. Grayson was in the dining room before he left, fetching his coat from the rack by the door. He passed the sideboard, but I didn't see him touch anything. I was busy clearing plates. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away this detail beside Grayson's insistence on pouring his own wine. And Miss Ward's behaviour? Did it change after dinner? She was quiet, Jenny said, sat by the window, sipping her wine slow. She looked pale, but I thought it was the quarrel. Then she started clutching her stomach, saying it hurt. Mr. Harper wanted to call doctor. Grayson back, but she said no, it'd pass. I helped her upstairs, and she was shivering, muttering about the wine being bitter. Bitter, Miss Marple murmured, her thoughts racing. And these mutterings about paying for it. Can you recall anything more? Jenny's eyes widened, as if surprised Miss Marple knew of her earlier remark. It was hard to hear, ma'am. She was in pain, tossing on the bed. I thought she said she'll pay for it, but it could have been they'll pay. I stayed with her till Mr. Harper sent for the doctor, but by then her voice trailed off, and Miss Marple patted her hand. You did all you could, dear. You've been most helpful. Now might I see the dining room again? Jenny led her through the folding doors to the dining room, where the mahogany table gleamed under a chandelier that cast prismatic light across the walls. The sideboard stood against the far wall, its polished surface reflecting the morning sun. The decanter, now empty and cleaned, sat beside a tray of crystal glasses, their clarity mocking the murkiness of the crime. Miss Marple approached, her eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a jeweller examining a gem. She noted the slight wear on the sideboard's edge, where countless hands had rested, and a faint scratch near the decanter's base, barely visible. Jenny, she said, turning, did Miss Ward often linger here after meals? Sometimes, Jenny replied. She liked to sit by the window, said the view of the garden calmed her. That night she stayed longer than usual. Miss Marple crossed to the window, its panes framing the vibrant roses outside. She imagined Evelyn there, glass in hand, her sly glance perhaps concealing a darker purpose. And the glasses, were they washed immediately after? Yes, ma'am, Jenny said. I took them to the kitchen right after Miss Ward went upstairs. Except hers. She left it on the table. The police took it later. Miss Marple's mind turned to the post-mortem, which had confirmed arsenic in Evelyn's glass. A deliberate act, but by whom? She thanked Jenny and returned to the drawing-room, where Clara had appeared, her face pale but composed. Reginald hovered nearby, his eyes darting between his wife and Miss Marple. "Any progress, Miss Marple?" Clara asked, her voice trembling with hope. "Small steps, my dear," Miss Marple replied, settling into an armchair, "but steps nonetheless." "Tell me, Clara, did Evelyn have any visitors during her stay? Someone from outside Danemouth, perhaps?" Clara frowned, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. "Not that I recall. She went into town often, shopping, she said, or to the post office. But once, about a week ago, I saw a man at the gate, late at night. I couldn't see his face, he wore a hat pulled low. Evelyn spoke to him briefly, then he left. She said it was a delivery boy, but it was odd. So late Miss Marple's heart quickened, recalling the stranger on the promenade. And did she seem upset after? Not upset exactly, Clara said. More excited, like she was planning something. She was humming the next morning, which wasn't like her. Before Miss Marple could press further, a knock at the door announced Inspector Crane's arrival. His stern face was set in lines of determination, and he carried a notebook bristling with papers. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding curtly. "Mrs. Harper, Mr. Harper, I've new information. The chemist, Mr. Pritchard, confirmed selling a small quantity of arsenic to Evelyn Ward 3 weeks ago. For rats, she claimed. No rats were found in the house. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Evelyn bought it. But why? Crane's eyes narrowed. That's what we're trying to establish. It strengthens the case against you, Mrs. Harper. If Miss Ward had arsenic, you could have taken it from her. Or, Miss Marple interjected gently, someone else did. Inspector, have you traced the telegram Clara mentioned, sent from London? Crane blinked, caught off guard. We're looking into it. The telegraph office keeps records, but it'll take time. Miss Marple smiled. Time is a great ally, Inspector. And Jenny, you might ask her about the dining room that night. Her memory is quite sharp. Crane grunted, making a note. I'll do that, but the evidence still points one way. As he left, Miss Marple turned to Clara. Don't despair, my dear. Evidence can be like a mirror, reflecting only what's placed before it. We must look behind it. The afternoon found her walking to the telegraph office, a small building near the harbour where a harried clerk sorted messages with ink-stained fingers. Miss Marple inquired about telegrams to Evelyn Ward, her demure manner disarming the clerk's initial reluctance. There was one, about 4 days ago, he admitted, flipping through a ledger. From London, sent to Laurel Cottage. I don't recall the content. Something about a meeting, I think. We don't keep copies unless requested, Miss Marple thanked him, her mind buzzing. A meeting, perhaps with the stranger at the gate. She stopped by the post office next, learning that Evelyn had received several letters from London, all collected personally, none left behind. The postmaster, a garrulous man, added that Evelyn had seemed on edge the last time she visited, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. Returning to the cottage, Miss Marple found Jenny in the garden, weeding among the roses. The girl looked up, startled, as Miss Marple approached. Jenny, she said, you've been wonderfully observant. One more question. Did Miss Ward ever mention a man, perhaps from London? Someone she might have expected? Jenny's eyes widened. Not by name, ma'am. But once, when I was dusting her room, she was writing a letter, stopped quick when I came in. I saw London on it, and she said something about settling old scores. I thought she meant a debt, maybe. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A debt, she murmured, or perhaps something less tangible. Thank you, Jenny. As evening fell, Miss Marple sat in the drawing room, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the ticking clock. The pieces were aligning. Evelyn's purchase of arsenic, her secretive correspondence, the stranger, the telegram. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead widow, Mrs. Price, whose spiteful letters had nearly ruined a neighbour's marriage, all to settle an imagined slight. Was Evelyn driven by similar malice, orchestrating her own death to frame Clara? Or had her London past, a debt, a betrayal, caught up with her, with someone else pulling the strings? Outside, the roses glowed in the twilight, their beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness within. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes distant. Tomorrow she would visit the chemist and pursue the telegram's origins. For now, she let the puzzle simmer, knowing that human nature, with its predictable unpredictability, would soon betray its secrets. Chapter 5. A Visit to the Chemist. The morning in Danemouth dawned with a mist that clung to the sea like a reluctant lover, softening the outlines of the harbour and muffling the cries of the gulls. Miss Jane Marple, ever attuned to the rhythms of the day, had risen early, her mind as sharp as the air that carried the tang of salt and seaweed through her open window. She sat at the small dressing table in her guest room at Laurel Cottage. her blue leather notebook open before her, its pages filling with neat, precise notes. The revelations of the previous day, Jenny's observation of Evelyn Ward's sly demeanour by the decanter, the mysterious telegram from London, the stranger at the gate, had woven a web of intrigue that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. Her knitting, a pale pink shawl now nearing completion, lay folded on the bed, a silent testament to her patience in untangling knots, whether of yarn or human motives. Dressing in a navy wool dress and a hat adorned with a modest feather, she prepared for a day of quiet investigation. The household was stirring. Clara Harper's soft footsteps echoed above, and Reginald's low voice murmured reassurances through the thin walls. Jenny, in the kitchen, clattered pots with a nervous energy that suggested she, too, felt the weight of the unfolding drama. Miss Marple tucked her notebook into her handbag, alongside a skein of yarn and her needles, and descended to the dining room, where a simple breakfast of tea, toast and marmalade awaited. Clara joined her, her face pale but resolute, her blue eyes searching Miss Marple's for a glimmer of hope. "Any progress, Miss Marple?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she poured tea with trembling hands. "Small threads, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone as soothing as chamomile. "But threads can lead to the heart of a tapestry. Today, I shall visit the chemist and see what more can be learned about Evelyn's purchase of arsenic." Clara nodded, her lips tightening. "I still can't believe she bought it herself." "Why would she?" "Unless," Miss Marple patted her hand, "let us not jump to conclusions, Clara. The truth has a way of revealing itself, like a flower opening in its own time." After breakfast, Miss Marple set out for the high street, her umbrella tapping the cobbles as she navigated the misty lanes. Danemouth was waking fully now, its shops opening their shutters to reveal displays of fresh fish, brightly coloured sweets, and postcards of the lighthouse that stood sentinel over the harbour. The chemist's shop, Pritchard and Sons, was a narrow establishment wedged between a bakery and a haberdashery, its window crowded with bottles of liniment, tonics, and patent medicines promising cures for everything from colds to melancholy. A bell jingled as Miss Marple entered, and the air inside was heavy with the scents of camphor and lavender. Mr. Pritchard, a portly man with a cheerful demeanour and spectacles perched precariously on his nose, looked up from behind the counter, where he was measuring powders into a mortar. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What can I do for you?" "Something for a headache, perhaps?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with a warmth that disarmed his curiosity. "Not today, Mr. Pritchard. I'm here about a rather delicate matter. Miss Evelyn Ward's purchase of arsenic some weeks ago. I understand you sold it to her?" Pritchard's smile faded, replaced by a cautious frown. "Aye, that's right. A sad business, her death. The police were here asking questions. I told them what I knew. She bought a small bottle, said it was for rats in her attic. Perfectly legal, though we don't sell much arsenic these days. Too dangerous with modern pest controls available." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers resting lightly on her handbag. "And did she come alone, or was anyone with her?" "Alone," Pritchard said firmly. "Came in one afternoon, all smiles and charm. Paid in cash, took the bottle, and left. Didn't linger to chat, which was unusual for her. She liked to talk, Miss Ward did." "Did she indeed?" Miss Marple's tone was conversational, but her mind was racing, recalling Jenny's mention of Evelyn's secretive nature. "And what did she talk about?" on other occasions. Pritchard leaned on the counter, warming to the chance to gossip. Oh, this and that. The weather, the shops. How Danemouth was too quiet for her tastes. She'd hint at her days in London. Parties, theatres, gentlemen callers. Always made it sound grand, but there was a bitterness to it, like she missed it and resented it at the same time. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Bitterness, you say? Did she ever mention debts or troubles from her past? Pritchard hesitated, polishing his spectacles as if to delay his answer. Not directly. But once, maybe a month back, she was here buying lavender water and let slip something about making things right. I thought she meant a family matter, but she clammed up when I asked. Miss Marple made a mental note, her thoughts drifting to the burned letter fragments and the word debt scrawled on one. And did she seem nervous or hurried when she bought the arsenic? Not nervous exactly, Pritchard said, more determined. Like she'd made up her mind about something. She even joked about the rats being stubborn pests. But her eyes were sharp, not laughing. Thanking him, Miss Marple stepped back into the misty street, her mind buzzing. Evelyn's purchase of arsenic, her cryptic remarks, her secretive correspondence, all pointed to a woman with a plan. But was it to harm herself, or another? She thought of Mrs. Langley in St. Mary Mead, who had once hoarded rat poison not for vermin, but to threaten a wayward husband. A scheme uncovered by a neighbour's keen observation. Human nature, Miss Marple mused, was a garden of tangled motives, and Evelyn's was proving to be a particularly thorny patch. Her next stop was the telegraph office, a cramped building near the harbour where the clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, was sorting messages with a distracted air. Miss Marple inquired about the telegram to Evelyn, mentioning the London origin Clara had noted. The clerk, initially reluctant, softened under her gentle persistence and checked his ledger. Yes, here it is, he said, pointing to a line. Sent 4 days before her death, from a London office in Kensington. Addressed to Miss Evelyn Ward at Laurel Cottage. I don't have the text. Senders can request privacy, but it was short, a dozen words or so. Something about a meeting, I recall, because I had to clarify the date. A meeting, Miss Marple echoed, her heart quickening. And was it signed? No name, the clerk said. Just initials, J.R., I think. We don't keep copies unless asked, and she didn't. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. J.R. dash a clue, or a coincidence. The stranger at the gate, the London letters, the telegram, all suggested Evelyn had been entangled in something beyond the petty quarrels of Laurel Cottage. She resolved to ask Clara and Reginald about any acquaintances with those initials, but first she returned to the cottage to probe further into Evelyn's last days. Clara was in the drawing-room, embroidering a cushion cover with unsteady hands, while Reginald sat by the window, reading a newspaper he clearly wasn't absorbing. Both looked up as Miss Marple entered, their faces a mix of hope and dread. "Miss Marple," Reginald said, rising. "You've been to the chemist?" "I have," she replied, settling into an armchair and drawing out her knitting. The needles clicked softly, a calming rhythm in the tense room. Evelyn bought the arsenic herself, claiming it was for rats. But there are no rats here, are there? "None," Clara said, her voice trembling. "The shed's clean, always has been. I don't understand why she'd buy it. Perhaps to use it," Miss Marple said gently, "or to ensure someone else was blamed." "Tell me, did Evelyn ever mention anyone with the initials J.R.? A friend, perhaps, from London?" Clara frowned, setting aside her embroidery. "J.R.? Not that I recall. She spoke of London vaguely. Parties, old friends, but no names. She was private about that part of her life. Reginald nodded. She'd get letters, though. I saw one with a Kensington postmark, but she snatched it up before I could read it. Said it was from a cousin, but she was cagey. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. And this cousin, did she ever mention their name? No, Reginald admitted, but she'd smile when she spoke of them, like it was a private joke. The conversation was interrupted by Jenny, announcing a visitor, Inspector Crane, his stern face set in lines of determination. He entered with a folder under his arm, his moustache twitching as he addressed the room. Miss Marple, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, he said, I've been to the telegraph office. The telegram was indeed from London, sent by a J. Randall. We're tracing the name, but it may be an alias. No record of such a person in Danemouth. Miss Marple's heart skipped. J. Randall, J.R., and the content inspector. Still unclear, Crane said. The clerk recalls a meeting mentioned, possibly at the harbour. We're checking passenger lists for trains from London that week. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A meeting at the harbour, perhaps with the stranger Clara saw at the gate. She turned to Jenny, who lingered in the doorway, her eyes wide with curiosity. Jenny, you mentioned Evelyn writing a letter about settling old scores. Did you ever see her with anyone unusual, perhaps near the harbour? Jenny hesitated, twisting her apron. Once, ma'am, about a week before she died. I was at the market, and I saw Miss Ward by the pier, talking to a man. Tall, dark coat, hat pulled low. I couldn't hear them, but she looked angry, jabbing her finger at him. He walked away fast, toward the station. Crane's eyes narrowed. Why didn't you mention this before? I didn't think it mattered, Jenny said, flushing. Just a spat, I thought. Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. Everything matters, Jenny. You've done well to remember. As Crane made notes, promising to investigate the harbour sighting, Miss Marple's thoughts turned inward. Evelyn's purchase of arsenic, her secretive meetings, the telegram from J. Randall, all pointed to a life beyond the surface charm she presented at Laurel Cottage. Was J. Randall a creditor, a spurned lover, or something more sinister? She recalled a St. Mary Mead scandal involving a young man who'd fled London debts, only to be blackmailed by an old associate. Had Evelyn's past caught up with her, or had she used it to craft a deadly scheme? After lunch, Miss Marple decided to revisit Evelyn's room, hoping to find more clues. With Clara's permission, she examined the locked jewellery box she'd noticed before. Reginald produced a small key, found among Evelyn's effects, and the box opened to reveal a collection of trinkets. Cheap rings, a tarnished locket, and a single pearl earring, its mate missing. Tucked beneath was a folded note, its edges singed as if narrowly spared from a fire. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the hurried script. Meet me at the pier, 8 p.m., Tuesday, J.R., no more delays. Her pulse quickened. Tuesday was the day before Evelyn's death. The note, combined with Jenny's sighting, confirmed a clandestine meeting. But for what purpose? She tucked the note into her notebook, resolving to show it to Crane later. The afternoon waned, and Miss Marple took a walk to the harbour, her umbrella shielding her from the drizzle that had replaced the morning mist. The pier was busy with fishermen, unloading their catch, their nets glistening with scales. She scanned the crowd, half hoping to spot the man in the dark coat, but saw only familiar faces. Vendors, sailors, children chasing crabs, yet the air felt charged, as if the sea itself held secrets it was reluctant to share. Returning to the cottage, she found Clara in the garden, tending the roses with a distracted air. "Miss Marple," Clara said, "I remembered something else." Evelyn had a photograph in her room of her and a man in London. She kept it hidden in a book. I saw it once when I was dusting, tall, dark-haired, maybe 30. She snatched it away when she caught me looking. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "A photograph, you say?" "Do you recall the book?" "A novel, Wuthering Heights, I think," Clara said. "It's still in her room." Upstairs, Miss Marple found the book on Evelyn's bedside table, its pages yellowed. She shook it gently, and a photograph fluttered out. A faded image of Evelyn, radiant in a silk dress, beside a man with sharp features and a guarded smile. The back bore no name, only a date, 1922. Was this J. Randall? She tucked the photograph into her notebook, her mind racing with possibilities. As dusk fell, Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a soft counterpoint to the ticking clock. The pieces were aligning. Evelyn's arsenic purchase, her meeting with J.R., the photograph, the burned letters. She thought of a saint. Mary Mead spinster, who'd once staged a theft to ruin a rival. Her envy a poison as deadly as arsenic. Was Evelyn's death a similar act of malice, designed to frame Clara? Or had J. Randall, or another figure from her past, turned her own weapon against her? The sea whispered beyond the windows, its rhythm echoing the questions in her mind. Tomorrow she would confront Dr. Grayson again and share the note with Crane. For now, she knitted on, each stitch a step closer to the truth, confident that the puzzle's final shape was within reach. Chapter 6. The Truth Unravelled. The evening sky over Danemouth hung heavy with clouds, casting a sombre pall over Laurel Cottage that mirrored the tension within its walls. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles idle for once. Her small figure a quiet anchor amid the gathering storm of revelation. The room, with its chintz armchairs and wilting lilies, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that the threads of the mystery were about to be woven into a final pattern. Clara Harper sat opposite, her delicate hands clasped tightly, her blue eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread. Reginald Harper paced by the window, his silhouette stark against the fading light, while Jenny hovered in the doorway, her apron twisted in nervous fingers. Inspector Crane stood by the fireplace, his stern face softened by curiosity, and Doctor. Arthur Grayson, summoned at Miss Marple's request, sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, his silver hair catching the lamplight. Miss Marple had spent the day piecing together the fragments she'd gathered. The arsenic bottle with Clara's fingerprints, Evelyn's purchase at the chemist, the cryptic note from J.R., the photograph hidden in Wuthering Heights, and Jenny's sighting of Evelyn's sly moment by the decanter. Each clue was a stitch in the fabric of truth. And now, with all parties assembled, she was ready to lay it bare. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle but firm, carrying the weight of certainty that comes from understanding the human heart. "I have always believed," she began, her eyes sweeping the room, "that the key to any mystery lies in the simplicity of human nature. People are predictable in their unpredictability, driven by passions as old as time. Love, envy, revenge. Miss Evelyn Ward, I'm afraid, was a woman consumed by one such passion. Spite." Clara gasped softly, and Reginald paused his pacing, his face a mask of confusion. Dr. Grayson's hands tightened on the arms of his chair, but he remained silent. Miss Marple continued, her tone as calm as if she were discussing village gossip over tea in St. Mary Mead. "Evelyn came to Laurel Cottage not for rest, but for a purpose," she said. "She resented you, Clara, your happiness, your home, your husband. As children, you were close, but time and circumstance changed her. Her London life, once glamorous, had crumbled. Debts, failed romances, a fading charm. She arrived here, I believe, to disrupt your peace, to reclaim a sense of power by sowing discord." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "But why?" "I never harmed her." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "Envy, my dear, is a poison of the soul. Evelyn's taunts, the borrowed dresses, the broken brooch, were deliberate, designed to provoke. But her plan went further. 3 weeks ago, she bought arsenic from Mr. Pritchard, claiming it was for rats. There are no rats in this house, as we know. I believe she intended to use it to stage her own death, framing you, Clara, in a final act of malice." Inspector Crane's moustache twitched. "That's a bold claim, Miss Marple." "Poison herself to frame Mrs. Harper. It's fantastic." "Not so fantastic," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "In my village, I once knew a woman, Mrs. Carter, who staged a theft to discredit a rival, knowing the blame would fall where she directed. Evelyn's mind worked similarly. She placed the arsenic bottle in the shed, ensuring Clara's fingerprints were on it. Clara, who tidied the shed regularly. She knew the police would find it, and the quarrel over the brooch, overheard by neighbours, would seal the case. Reginald stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "But the wine! How did she do it?" "We all drank from the same decanter." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the knitting in her lap. "A clever detail." Jenny saw Evelyn by the sideboard before dinner, holding a glass with a sly look. Believe Evelyn slipped the arsenic into her own glass, not the decanter, ensuring only she would be poisoned. She drank heavily that night, perhaps to mask the taste, and her collapse came hours later. As arsenic's effects are slow, the residue in her glass, which the police tested, confirmed it was hers alone. Crane frowned, flipping open his notebook. "But the fingerprints, only Mrs. Harper's on the bottle. How do you explain that?" "Evelyn was careful," Miss Marple said. "She wore gloves, perhaps, or wiped the bottle clean before placing it where Clara would touch it. The shed was unlocked, accessible to anyone, but Evelyn knew Clara's habits. She orchestrated the evidence to point one way." Dr. Grayson cleared his throat, his voice tight. "This is extraordinary, Miss Marple." "But why would Evelyn go to such lengths? To die for spite?" Miss Marple turned to him, her gaze steady and piercing. "You knew her better than most, Doctor." "Grayson. As her physician, you saw her melancholy, her manipulative nature. Did you never suspect she was capable of such a scheme?" Grayson's face paled, his hands clenching. I knew she was troubled. Her moods were volatile, her pride wounded by her failures in London. But suicide to ruin Clara, I never imagined it." Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps not." "But you were cautious, Doctor. You poured your own wine that night, insisting on it, as if you suspected something. Why?" Grayson flinched, his eyes darting to the others. "It was habit, nothing more. I prefer my wine aerated longer. I had no reason to suspect poison." "Yet you left early," Miss Marple pressed, her voice soft but relentless, "before Evelyn's symptoms appeared. And you were quick to confirm her death as arsenic poisoning, based on her symptoms alone. Most doctors would hesitate without a post-mortem." Crane's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer to Grayson. Is this true, Doctor? Did you know more than you let on? Grayson's composure cracked, his voice rising. I knew nothing. I treated Evelyn as a patient, a friend. I saw her pain, her bitterness, but I never thought she'd do this. Miss Marple's needles, now in her hands, clicked softly, a counterpoint to the rising tension. There is another piece to this puzzle, she said. Evelyn's life in London. She received letters, a telegram from a J. Randall, arranging a meeting at the harbour. Jenny saw her there, arguing with a man in a dark coat. A note in her room, signed J.R., confirmed it. I believe this man was connected to her past, perhaps a creditor, perhaps a lover scorned. Evelyn spoke of settling old scores, as Jenny overheard. Did she confide in you, Doctor? Grayson, about this J. Randall? Grayson's jaw tightened, and for a moment he seemed to weigh his words. She mentioned a man once, he admitted at last. A business associate, she called him. Someone who'd cheated her, she said, in a property deal. She was vague, angry. I advised her to let it go, but she wouldn't listen. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. And this photograph, she said, producing the faded image from Wuthering Heights, showing Evelyn with a dark-haired man. Do you recognize him? Grayson studied it, his face impassive. No, she had many admirers in London. It could be anyone. Clara leaned forward, her voice trembling. But why frame me? If she was angry at this man, why hurt me? Miss Marple's eyes softened with sympathy. Because you had what she wanted, Clara. A home, love, stability. Her London life had collapsed, and she envied you. By framing you, she could destroy your happiness and leave a legacy of pain. It was her final act of control. Crane rubbed his chin, his skepticism waning. It fits, I'll grant you. The arsenic purchase, the fingerprints, the quarrel, it all points to a setup. But this J. Randall, who is he, and does he matter? He matters, Miss Marple said, because he may confirm Evelyn's state of mind. If he was a creditor, he might have pushed her to desperation, reinforcing her plan. Or, if he was involved, he could be a danger still. Have you traced him, Inspector? We're trying, Crane said. The London police are checking Kensington addresses. But without more, it's a needle in a haystack. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes distant. Needles are found, Inspector, when one knows where to look. I suggest you check the passenger lists for trains from London the day of the harbour meeting, and perhaps inquire at Evelyn's former lodgings in Kensington. She burned letters, but some may remain. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Jenny, still in the doorway, let out a small sob, and Clara reached for Reginald's hand, tears streaming down her face. So I'm innocent? She whispered. You always were, my dear, Miss Marple said gently. The evidence was a lie, crafted to deceive. But truth, like a stubborn weed, always breaks through. Grayson stood abruptly, his face flushed. This is speculation. You've no proof Evelyn poisoned herself. What if this J. Randall slipped the arsenic in her glass? Miss Marple's gaze was unwavering. Possible, but unlikely. The arsenic was in her glass alone, not the decanter. Only Evelyn had the opportunity to tamper with it, as Jenny saw her by the sideboard. And her motive, envy, fits her actions. You, Doctor, saw her bitterness. Did you never suspect she might turn it inward? Grayson sank back into his chair, his shoulders sagging. I should have seen it, he murmured. She was so proud, so angry. I thought she'd recover. Find a new path. Crane closed his notebook with a snap. This changes everything. If Miss Ward poisoned herself, the case against Mrs. Harper collapses. I'll need to review the evidence, but your theory holds water, Miss Marple." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression humble but satisfied. "I only point out what's there, Inspector. Human nature does the rest." As the group dispersed, Crane to the police station, Grayson to his practice, Jenny to her duties, Miss Marple remained with Clara and Reginald, offering quiet reassurance. "It's not over yet," she said. "The police will confirm the details, and J. Randall may yet shed light." "But you're safe now, Clara." Reginald embraced his wife, his voice choked. "Thank you, Miss Marple. We were lost without you." She smiled, picking up her knitting. "Nonsense, Mr. Harper. I merely saw what was before me. Now I think a cup of tea would do us all good." As Jenny brought the tea tray, Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on J. Randall. Was he a catalyst, or merely a shadow in Evelyn's past? She recalled a saint, Mary Mead spinster, Miss Barrow, who'd once staged a public collapse to shame a rival, only to be undone by her own pride. Evelyn's scheme was grander, darker, but no less human. The truth was clear, yet a single thread remained loose. The man in the dark coat, whose role might yet unravel a deeper secret. Outside the clouds parted, and a sliver of moonlight touched the roses, their petals glowing like silent witnesses. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly, each stitch a testament to the patience that had unravelled the truth. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Danemouth, casting a golden sheen across the rooftops and glinting off the harbour's restless waves. Laurel Cottage, so recently a house of shadows, seemed to breathe more freely, as if the revelation of Evelyn Ward's sinister design had lifted a weight from its ivy-clad walls. Miss Jane Marple stood at the window of her guest room, her small suitcase packed, her knitting bag slung over her arm. The pale pink shawl, now complete, lay folded on the bed, its delicate loops a quiet testament to the patience that had unravelled a far darker knot. Below, the garden's roses glowed with renewed vibrancy, their petals catching the light like silent promises of renewal. Miss Marple's mind, however, was not entirely at rest. The previous evening's confrontation had cleared Clara Harper of suspicion, with Inspector Crane conceding that Evelyn's self-inflicted poisoning was the most plausible explanation. Yet the shadow of J. Randall, the mysterious figure from Evelyn's London past, lingered like a faint mist. Who was he, and what role had he played in pushing Evelyn toward her fatal act? Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, where a young woman's desperate bid to escape a creditor had led to a staged accident, uncovered only by a chance remark from a postman. Human nature, she mused, was a tapestry woven with threads of greed, pride, and despair, and Evelyn's story was but one more pattern in its intricate design. Descending to the drawing-room, she found Clara and Reginald seated together, their hands entwined, their faces softened by relief. Clara's eyes, once shadowed with fear, now held a tentative hope, though the strain of the ordeal lingered in the lines around her mouth. Reginald rose as Miss Marple entered, his gratitude evident in his earnest handshake. "Miss Marple, we can never repay you," he said, his voice thick. "Clara's free, the charge is dropped. Inspector Crane telephoned this morning. The case is closed." Clara nodded, her voice trembling. "They found no evidence to contradict your theory, Miss Marple." "Evelyn did it to herself, to hurt me. I still can't fathom why she hated me so." Miss Marple settled into an armchair, her knitting bag at her feet, and fixed Clara with a gentle gaze. "Envy, my dear, is a poison as deadly as arsenic." Evelyn saw and knew what she had lost: a loving home, a devoted husband. Her life in London, once glittering, had tarnished, and she could not bear your contentment. But let us not dwell on her darkness. You have your life to reclaim. Reginald's jaw tightened. It's monstrous, though. To die for spite, to frame Clara, it's beyond comprehension. "Not beyond," Miss Marple said softly. "In my village, I've seen such motives play out in smaller ways: a stolen letter, a whispered lie." Evelyn's act was grander, but no less human. She wanted control, even in death. The conversation was interrupted by Jenny, who entered with a tray of tea, her usual nervous energy replaced by a quiet pride. "I made scones, ma'am," she said, setting the tray down, "to celebrate Mrs. Harper's freedom. You've done a miracle, Miss Marple." Miss Marple smiled, accepting a cup. "No miracle, Jenny. Merely observation and a touch of experience. You helped greatly, you know. Your memory of Evelyn by the sideboard was crucial." Jenny blushed, brushing a strand of auburn hair under her cap. "I only said what I saw." "I'm glad it helped." As they sipped tea, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to J. Randall. Inspector Crane had promised to pursue the lead, but she knew police resources were stretched, and a London alias could prove elusive. She resolved to make one final inquiry before returning to St. Mary Mead, hoping to tie the loose thread that still nagged at her. "Clara," she said, "you mentioned Evelyn's photograph with a man. Have you recalled anything more about him? Perhaps a name, a detail?" Clara frowned, stirring her tea absently. "Nothing specific." She was secretive about her London friends. "But the photograph, it was taken at a garden party, I think." There was a gazebo in the background, and Evelyn was laughing, so unlike her later self. The man looked intense, like he was studying her. Miss Marple nodded, the image of the dark-haired man in her notebook vivid in her mind. "And you, Reginald, did Evelyn ever speak of business dealings? Perhaps a property venture gone wrong?" Reginald shook his head. "Only in passing. She mentioned losing money on a flat in Kensington, said someone had swindled her." She laughed it off, but her eyes were hard. I didn't press. Evelyn wasn't one for sharing. Before Miss Marple could probe further, a knock at the door announced Inspector Crane's arrival. He entered, his stern face softened by a rare smile. "Miss Marple, Mr. and Mrs. Harper," he said, tipping his hat. "I've news from London." We traced J. Randall, a John Randall, a property broker in Kensington. He's known for shady deals, preying on women like Evelyn, who had money but little business sense. We found a letter at her old lodgings, confirming a meeting in Danemouth. He admitted to arguing with her at the harbour, said she owed him money from a failed investment. He claims he left after she refused to pay. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "And do you believe him, Inspector?" Crane shrugged. "He's a slippery sort, but his alibi holds. Train records show he returned to London that night, hours before Evelyn's death. He's no saint, but he's not our killer." Miss Marple nodded, her mind fitting this new piece into place. John Randall may have been the spark that lit Evelyn's fuse. His demand for payment, her wounded pride, it could have pushed her to her final act. Did he mention her state of mind? "Angry, defiant," Crane said. Said she laughed in his face, told him he'd get nothing, that she had other plans. Sounds like your theory, Miss Marple. She was planning her exit. The room fell silent, the weight of Evelyn's choice settling over them. Clara shivered, and Reginald drew her close. "It's over then," she whispered. but I'll never understand her." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene but thoughtful. "Understanding comes with time, my dear. For now, let her rest and rebuild your life." After Crane departed, promising to finalize the paperwork clearing, Clara, Miss Marple prepared to leave for the station. Her train to St. Mary Mead was due at noon, and she felt the pull of her quiet village, where roses and gossip awaited. But before departing, she took a final walk through the garden, pausing by the shed where the arsenic bottle had been found. The roses, vibrant in the morning light, seemed to nod in approval, their beauty a reminder that life persisted despite tragedy. As she walked to the station, her umbrella tapping the cobbles, she reflected on Evelyn Ward, a woman whose charm had masked a heart corroded by envy, whose final act was as much a cry for power as a surrender to despair. The photograph, the telegram, the arsenic, all tools in a scheme as calculated as it was cruel. Yet John Randall's role nagged at her. Had he merely provoked Evelyn, or was there more to his story? She thought of Mr. Hodges, a saint, Mary Mead farmer who'd once fled a debt only to return years later, his secrets spilling out over a pint at the pub. Perhaps Randall, too, held truths yet to be uncovered. At the station, Clara and Reginald met her, their faces alight with gratitude. Clara pressed a small bouquet of roses into her hands, their scent sweet and grounding. "Miss Marple, you've given us our lives back," she said, tears brimming. "How can we ever thank you?" Miss Marple smiled, patting Clara's hand. "Live well, my dear. That's thanks enough. And perhaps plant a new rose bush, something to mark a fresh start." Reginald shook her hand, his grip firm. "If you're ever in Danemouth, Laurel Cottage is your home." The train whistle sounded, and Miss Marple boarded, settling by the window with her knitting bag. As the countryside rolled past, fields of wheat, patches of woodland, farmhouses with curling smoke, she opened her notebook, reviewing her final observations. Evelyn's scheme had been clever, but human nature was never infallible. Pride, envy, spite, they left traces, like footprints in the dust of a shed. And John Randall? She suspected he'd fade into London shadows, his role in Evelyn's story a footnote, not a chapter. Back in St. Mary Mead, her cottage welcomed her with the familiar creak of its gate and the hum of bees in the garden. Dolly, bustling in the kitchen, greeted her with a pot of Darjeeling and a barrage of village news. Mrs. Price's new hat, the vicar's sermon, a missing cat. Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting resumed, the pink shawl draped over her lap like a trophy of triumph. Yet, as she knitted, her thoughts lingered on Danemouth. The truth had surfaced, as it always did, but the human cost remained. Evelyn's life, wasted on malice, Clara's innocence, nearly stolen, Reginald's faith, tested but unbroken. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead spinster, Miss Fowler, whose bitter will had divided a family, her legacy one of discord rather than love. Evelyn's story was grander but no less tragic. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, marking the hours of a village at peace. Miss Marple's needles moved with quiet precision, each stitch a reminder that life, like a shawl, was woven from countless small moments. Some bright, some dark, but all essential to the whole. She sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the roses outside, and knew that when the next knock came at her door, she would be ready to unravel another mystery, another glimpse into the eternal puzzle of the human heart.